On May 2nd, 2011, at approximately 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, as President Obama sat in the terse situation room with Leon Panetta, head of the CIA, and Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State, the tension was broken by a Navy SEAL transmission from 6,000 miles away in Abbottabad, Pakistan. The transmission said, Geronimo, E-K-I-A. Geronimo, enemy, killed in action. Now, if you were a Native American, you could infer two things from this statement. One, that Geronimo, the most revered of Apache warriors, was being equated with the world's most vicious terrorist. Or that Geronimo is just a term the U.S. Army has been using since World War II when paratroopers first started jumping out of planes. Geronimo times out perfectly between leaping and pulling the cord. In other words, it's just a word. So if that's the case, why didn't the operative just say Fats Domino, E-K-I-A? Now who's upset? Fat pianists? No one. Nonetheless, it shows you that 520 years since the discovery of America, 120 years since the massacre at Wounded Knee, and roughly 20 years since the release of a film called Thunderheart, an execrable piece of apologistic, overly sentimental, misty-eyed cinematic tripe starring Val Kilmer as a Part Sioux FBI agent, Native Americans are still getting the short end of the stick.
They sent him to a foreign land.
What's my cover?
In the middle of America.
You're going in there as who you are, an American Indian federal officer.
To uncover the truth.
Federal officer, hands on your head. Do it!
Who are you?
Walter Crowhorse, Tribal Police.
You must be the Indian FBI.
That's right.
Oh, what nation?
The United States. What's your name?
Sure as hell ain't Geronimo, Chief.
No other Indian figure has been more misrepresented, misappropriated, reinvented, or just conjured from celluloid scratch as Geronimo. In 1939, the director John Ford stamped an indelible image of him as a bloodthirsty savage in Stagecoach. He burns down cabins and butchers women and children for no apparent reason. No historical perspective, just a name that invokes fear, Geronimo. Now, nowadays, of course, he's used to lure butt-weary travelers off of Route 66 here to pull into places like this and spend all their money on genuine Indian souvenirs made in Malaysian sweatshops. It's possible Billy Connolly has already covered this in his travelogue, but at least I'm explaining it to you in English. Is it possible in a 4-minute scene featuring an Indian attack on Western settlers for America's preeminent Western director to get at least 10 things wrong? Well, let's count them. Stagecoach is supposed to take place in Lordsburg, New Mexico, an area where Geronimo spent much of his life. Clearly, this setting is Monument Valley, Arizona. Apaches wore wide cloth headbands which covered the entire tops of their heads. These headbands were invented by a costume designer to hold the actors' wigs in place. How do you get close enough to shoot an arrow into a guy's chest without everyone hearing you coming? Apaches never attacked in broad daylight. They sneaked in under cover of darkness. They didn't run around pointlessly firing their guns into the air. They're not Iraqis. If you want to stop a stagecoach, you shoot the lead horse. Number 6. Apaches didn't jump off their horses onto other horses. The only person who could do that was a stuntman named Yakima Canutt. That man under the horse is Yakima Canutt. How is it possible to shoot 2 Indians with 1 bullet? Number 8. Throwing rocks at your horse doesn't make it go faster. Apaches didn't have saddles on their horses. Only soldiers had saddles on their horses. And finally, that is one ugly baby. Wow. The 1962 version of Geronimo took painstaking steps to tell the story from Geronimo's perspective, that of a leader forced to surrender to U.S. authorities over promises never kept. His people are made to endure vast indignity.
I'm not an animal that has to be branded.
Geronimo. It was a name that...
In that version, Geronimo was played by a blue-eyed, pumpkin-tinted TV star and ex-professional baseball player named Chuck Connors.
Chuck Connors makes a complete departure from the role that made him famous to create the heroic figure of the Apache warrior who strove against impossible odds for dignity and freedom.
Let me feel him kick.
Careful there, Chuck. Your aim looks a little too high. In 1993's Geronimo, an American Legend, Hollywood finally hit on the idea of casting an American Indian in the lead role of a movie about an American Indian. The Cherokee actor Wes Studi gives a much more definitive portrait of the Apache warrior and his band of followers who spent 5 years trying to elude capture and forced settlement by the U.S. government.
When I was young, the White-Eye came and wanted the land of my people. When their soldiers burnt our villages, we moved to the mountains. When they took our food, we ate thorns.
The film stars Jason Patric, Matt Damon, Robert Duvall, Gene Hackman, and Wes Studi as Geronimo, in that order. The title character gets 5th billing. In truth, it's probably impossible to tell the story of the Indian on film because an Indian's notion of time itself, like travel, is always circular. The real Geronimo was offered the services of a car in 1905 after he was incarcerated at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. He turned the offer down. He didn't want a goddamn car. He wanted to be free. 4 years later, at the age of 79, riding back to his assigned home in the snow, he fell from his horse. A week later, he was dead of pneumonia. That's the real story of Geronimo. For the record, bin Laden's code name wasn't even Geronimo. It was Jackpot. The code name for the operation was Geronimo. See, we're still getting it wrong.
Put Geronimo in jail down south, where he couldn't look the gift horse in the mouth. Sergeant, Sergeant, don't you feel something wrong with your automobile? Whoa, take me back, I wanna ride in Geronimo's Cadillac. Whoa, take me back, I wanna ride in Geronimo's Cadillac.
Okay, Rich, are you going to spend this entire documentary pontificating about how the Indians got a raw deal because we all know the Indians got a raw deal? Is that what you're thinking? Or are you going to let some Indians weigh in on the issue? Well, this is Dallas Goldtooth. He is Dakota and Dene. Hi.
Howdy.
What do you think?
About what?
The whole Geronimo, EKIA thing.
Oh, yeah. I really don't know who Fats Domino is.
He was a piano player. First name self-explanatory.
Ah, gotcha. You know, Geronimo was one of our heroes. This blazing figure in the memory of Indians everywhere. And his whole usage of his name in association with bin Laden, it's another notch in the proverbial club that we shall use one day against the white-skinned, blue-eyed, cowboy hat-wearing, unibrow-having nation of people like you.
So that whole John Ford thing, what do you think about that? Strident, foreshadowing?
You're doing good, man. Doing real good.
When it comes to portraying the Indian on film, how has Hollywood managed to get it wrong every single time? Because cinematically, the Indian had to be killed off before he could be reinvented. It begins with popular literature. In 1826, James Fenimore Cooper, a Connecticut writer, was vacationing on Long Island, New York, when he succumbed to sunstroke. And under this delirious condition, he began penning the second part of his trilogy of leather-stocking tales. The story is called Last of the Mohicans, effectively implying a tribe's extinction even before the first line of the book. The hero is a white frontiersman named either Natty Bumppo or Hawkeye, depending on who's talking to him. Hawkeye knows the backwoods, even better than his Indian counterpart, Chingachgook, even though Chingachgook and his people have been around a few thousand years longer. This is the trope of white European superiority that will reappear again and again in books and films which, by nature of their titles, should be about the subject mentioned in the title. Unfortunately, the Indians in the book are more or less just a dramatic backdrop. Cooper, quite possibly because of sunstroke, couldn't quite seem to remember which specific tribe of Algonquin Indians he was talking about, either Mohicans or Mohegans. So he just blended them together and called them Mohicans. book is a bloated, turgid, orotund work of spectacular historical misrepresentation, so naturally became massively popular, both with British readers and those Americans who could read. It's been made into a movie at least 5 times. Whatever thin credibility the book retained was lost to the movie, where the principal Indian characters are nothing more than cardboard, slightly hysterical stereotypes.
It's complete bullocks, man. Is that what your people say?
Not my people. Toward the end of the story, Chingachgook invokes the title by saying, "When my son Uncas follows in my footsteps, there will be no more blood of the Sagamores, for he is the last of the Mohicans." Thus, Cooper effectively consigns an entire tribe to the trash heap, paving the way for popular literature and later cinema to reinvent the Indian as it sees fit. And boy, have they ever. By the way, the Mohicans are still around, as are the Mohegans, who own the women's NBA basketball team, the Connecticut Sun. Also, the Mohegan Resort and Casino in Uncasville, Connecticut. What is this stuff?
Like fry bread?
Yeah.
It's fried bread.
Man, I owe Scotland an apology.
And there are troughs beyond the mountain.
Although white moviegoers may not have been that savvy, Indians must have realized early on that they were being contrived for the sake of a convenient story.
You know, when I was a kid, I'd sit on my dad's lap and we'd watch Westerns or Rin Tin Tin or John Wayne, and he'd grumble. Those aren't Indians. Look how he's walking. Look at the way he's moving.
Connie prayed. All white man prayed.
I think the image of American Indians in America is nothing short of slanderous. They ridicule the way we laugh, the way we sing, the way we dance, our prayers, our names. Everything is ridiculed.
Now I know why they call him Sitting Bull.
We're talking about a figment of somebody's imagination, really.
Well, when you watch Cowboys and Indians, like, as a kid, you can't help but get caught up in it, you know? We played Cowboys and Indians. I always ended up being a freaking Indian. I always freaking died as an Indian. Cousin always wanted to be a cowboy, and he wouldn't let us kill him because cowboys don't die. Fuck. Kind of sucked being an Indian, now I'm thinking about it.
Regardless of what terminology you choose, natives, first people, aboriginals, savages, the undeniable fact is there were hundreds of thousands, probably millions of indigenous people inhabiting the Americas before it was discovered. The Indian was invented at the very moment that we invented the word Indian. We call Native Americans Indians because that's always where Columbus thought he had landed. He wasn't the first explorer to reach the Americas, but he was the first to stick around and realize that it wasn't the paradise he'd envisioned, which is kind of the difference between an immigrant and a tourist. Americans are brought up to believe that Columbus was America's first hero because he embodied that very essence of mythical character. Explorer, adventurer, prospector, pacifier of savages, lawmaker, town builder, you know, cowboy.
Driven by a sense of destiny and ambition, he crossed the sea of darkness in search of honor, gold, and the greater glory of God.
500 years after Columbus landed in what we now call the Americas, Ridley Scott attempted to put the Hollywood spin on him by casting him as a compromised hero, a man rebelling against the screwed-up value system of Europe. Columbus is portrayed by that renowned Italian actor, Gerard Depardieu, as a man whose religious fanaticism leads to the tragic demise of the Taino Indian nation.
The extraordinary story of the discovery of a new world.
1492 Conquest of Paradise is turgid apologist hokum. But Americans want to believe anything but the truth about Columbus, because after all, we named a city in Ohio after him, and a capital district, and a river, and a carry-on film. But Columbus wasn't just America's first cowboy. He was a New World, God-bothering, long-haired, Jesus-freak, Bible-humping cowboy. And he loved Willie Nelson. He never kicked a puppy. Had steer horns on the front of his boat. He believed in his heart he'd been chosen by God to convert savages to Christianity. His journals depict him as a man desperate to find gold for Queen Isabella. But the Taino repeatedly tried to tell him there were other islands nearby where there was much more gold than sand. They were trying to get rid of him because, frankly, he was annoying the hell out of everyone. But Columbus kept coming back. For the next couple of centuries, the Indians of both North and South America would be systematically plundered and enslaved, both individually by the Spanish conquistadors Cortez, Pizarro, De Soto, the English pirates of Francis Drake, but also corporately by the French Company of 100 Associates, the Dutch East India Trade Company, the British Hudson Bay Company. It wasn't just a rape, it was a gangbang. So, when you get a moment, thank an Indian. For what? Oh, I don't know. Gold? Silver? Those rubber wellies you like to wear? Thank an Indian. The Indians gave us aspirin. It's quinine for malaria. Got a coke habit? Like to toke on a fatty, maybe drink a little mezcal tequila? Thank an Indian. Thank an Indian for beans on toast, for cotton, cornflakes, chocolate, fish and chips, pasties. 60% of all the foods we consume are Indian in origin. Maple syrup, corn syrup, anything made from corn. It was the Pueblo Indians of this very area who discovered that if you soak corn in lime and ash, it made an alkali solution that let the body absorb the nutrients. Thank an Indian. Potatoes. You like potatoes? Of course you like potatoes, Britain. Mashed up, slathered in gravy? Well, you didn't used to. Brits thought the potato caused leprosy. Russians, French, all deathly afraid of that misshapen devil. Only those lovable, starving Irish took a chance on the potato. The Indians had over 60 varieties of potatoes, but the Irish took all their potatoes and put them into one potato basket. Then when the blight came, they all starved. A lot of them had to move to America. 1/5 of the U.S. cavalry that fought the various plains and southwestern Indians for over 50 years was made of transplanted Irish. So thank an Indian for killing an Indian. Here in the Navajo land, the word for thank you is ahihet. Could also apologize for the 500 years of abuse and humiliation and systematic displacement, but it probably wouldn't do any good, because there's no word in Navajo for sorry. The colonial expansionist movement was relentless in the New World. Their interactions with natives were at times amicable, but the overarching agenda for those who came to the Americas in ships was to claim the land and the resources as their own by any means necessary.
The founding fathers were looters. Jesus Christ, fucking looters. And we always say everything that Americans have, they could have had it anyway if they just asked. I mean, Jesus Christ, all they had to do is, well, there's a saying somebody said, why do you obtain by hate? You could obtain by love. So, we said welcome, this and that, and everybody just went apeshit, So, and that's the building blocks on it.
White expansion in America continued at a relentless pace throughout the 19th century. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson instituted the not-so-subtly named Indian Removal Act, which more or less declared Indians were an obstruction. Entire nations, particularly the Cherokee and the Choctaw, were forcibly removed from their lands in Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee and resettled onto arid, hard-pan reservations in Oklahoma. And for his efforts, Jackson now graces the $20 U.S. banknote. E pluribus unum, that's the motto that appears in all U.S. currency. It means out of many, one. Unity. The entire thrust of U.S. history has been to preserve the Union. We fought a civil war over it. Union won. Disunion got its ass kicked from Richmond to Vicksburg to Atlanta. When the war ended, the word became emblematic of progress. Western Union Telegraph, the Union Pacific Railroad. Naturally, this driving motto, out of many one, was applied to the Indians. The U.S. government could not quite seem to accept that Native Americans weren't too keen on this. Forced unity went against the very grain of true freedom, something the U.S. had long lost sight of. America's policy toward Native Americans is still pretty much the same, and that policy is, why can't these people get with the program?
Oh, the program. We never wanted to be Americans. People come here, they want to be Americans. We never wanted to be. We have our own thing to this day. We're sovereign people, and we don't want it. We have a better way of life to this day. And also the other thing with Americans, they love going around the world. We're giving these people freedom. We're giving them freedom. Indian people have always been free.
We couldn't live that way they tried to make us. The government cannot understand the Indian way of life. They think they could change their language and their way of life overnight. But they can't. They tried to teach them English and they tried to do it. I used to go to school when they washed my mouth out with soap and water if I spoke Indian. And they used to whip me for it.
Also in the Declaration of Independence to this very day, it says savage Indians in it, at least 3 times. And I would say, you think they'd have the wherewithal, they'd change it to savage Native Americans at least. Shit. And that's another word I never liked, because we are older than America. So how can we be native to something we're older than?
Majority of indigenous peoples have creation stories that place them in a certain location at a certain time. It's not just that, oh, my people moved here. No, we came out of that mountain right over there. That was where we emerged. And we're going to be here, you know?
So the tragedy of being forcibly moved is not just about the suffering that they have to endure during that movement, but of actually being displaced from their land.
Heck yeah. I mean, it's a part of the human condition to bond to your location, I feel, you know?
Jesus told me, and I believe it's true, the red men are in the sunset too. They stole their land and they won't give it back, and they sent Geronimo Cadillac. Come on!
They ought to shoot those darn Redskins while they got the chance.
Yeah, the sooner they get rid of them, the safer this country will be for us Americans.
That's your lie.
Fight! Fight now! Or are we too weak from hunger? Or our men forget ways of war?
Apache never forget ways of war.
Hollywood has always been less concerned about what an Indian is than who an Indian is. They assume that viewers wouldn't be able to identify the individual aspects of any Indian tribe because they were lazy. So they just created this Frankenstein amalgam of what they imagined an Indian to be. They took Sioux war bonnets and stuck them onto Navajo warriors and then put them in Texas. They took the Indian ceremonial body markings, usually used to indicate a social or marital status, and just called it war paint. They stuck teepees in the desert. These characters generally communicated by whooping or a series of protracted grunts or some kind of anthropomorphic gibberish. For instance, in Raoul Walsh's A Distant Trumpet, a film about the U.S. cavalry confronting the Chiricahua Apache, Walsh employed Navajo actors to play Apaches. Told them just to make up their own dialogue. So, only if you were fluent in Diné Navajo, which Walsh clearly wasn't, would you even be able to understand what the Navajo were really saying.
He's saying you're going to be a snake crawling through your own shit. Obviously, you can't do anything right now because you're going to be a snake crawling through your own shit.
Seriously?
Yeah, seriously.
Because I don't know whether to believe you or not, because you're wearing a headdress.
It's irony, man. Indians can't do humor, but we sure as hell can do irony.
Okay, Indians do irony, but they don't do humor. The photographer Edward Curtis certainly knew how to capture the ironic American Indian. He took thousands of photographs, every one as stoic and resolute as a postage stamp. So we need to ask the question, why don't the Indians have a sense of humor?
In the Treaty of 1868 with the government and the Mohoganese, we signed it away. We were tricked. We didn't know.
Indians, we gotta keep our dignity. Humor, it's not dignified.
Chris Ayres' 1998 Smoke Signals, based on a Sherman Alexie short story, is one of the most highly regarded indigenous films ever made, and probably the funniest.
First of all, quit grinning like an idiot. Indians ain't supposed to smile like that. Get stoic.
Its humor is sly. It comes from the character's self-awareness that the world's perception of Indians generally vacillates between sympathetic and romantic.
You gotta look mean or people won't respect you. White people will run all over you if you don't look mean. You gotta look like a warrior. You gotta look like you just came back from killing a buffalo.
But our tribe never hunted buffalo. We were fishermen.
What? You want to look like you just came back from catching a fish? This ain't Dances with Salmon, you know. Thomas, you gotta look like a warrior.
One of the great things about being an Indian is if you see one in a film, you're going to see scores. And that means jobs, jobs, jobs. The sight of a band of fully costumed warriors astride their magnificent steeds thundering into the valley is the very cinematic essence of the term spectacular. And nobody knew this better than Thomas Ince. Hollywood's first real mogul, Ince built a massive studio in the Santa Monica Mountains, and he oversaw dozens of productions at once, crediting himself with directing every one. His most popular movies were Cowboy and Indian two-reelers, and to keep up with demand for extras, Ince struck a deal with the federal government to import a Oglala Sioux from the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. This was 1913. Only 23 years earlier, this same government had massacred the Sioux near Pine Ridge Reservation. To the many categories of Sioux that already existed, Oglala, Minneconjou, Hunkpapa, was added a new tribe, the Inceville Hollywood Sioux. They settled into teepee villages perched right outside Ince's studio overlooking the Pacific. And when they weren't working, they just kind of wandered around Los Angeles. According to Ince, they developed an affinity for brightly colored props. He kept having to go into their teepee camps to retrieve bits of his set. So many Indians were being used in the early reign of Westerns that studio owners struggled to fill the cast. Consequently, there was an endless parade of darkly complected Syrians, dusky Lebanese, effulgent Jews, tawny Mexicans, swarthy Italian Americans, adumbral Filipinos. I don't even know what that word means. Irradiated lifeguards, burnished surfers, and other guys with sable-tinted skin skirting the edges of skin cancer passed themselves off as Indians. One of the most outspoken critics of this practice was none other than Jim Thorpe, often cited as one of America's greatest athletes.
An Oklahoma Indian lad whose untamed spirit gave wings to his feet and carried him to immortality. Here in a mighty cavalcade of sport are all the giants who face this champion among champions.
Thorpe was an Oklahoman from the Sac and Fox Reservation who astounded the sporting world by winning gold medals in both the decathlon and pentathlon at the 1912 Olympics. He would go on to play professional baseball and football. And after his retirement, he began a new career as an actor, appearing in supporting roles that required a native character. In the early 1930s, upon discovery that roughly 40% of Hollywood's so-called Indian actors weren't really Indian, Thorpe emerged as the leading activist against the practice of hiring non-Indians to portray Indians. He formed his own company of true Native American actors and hired them out to studios, thus guaranteeing the integrity of their bloodlines.
Jim Thorpe, All-American, the man of bronze who became...
Thorpe's life, both its ups and downs, was commemorated to film in 1951 in Jim Thorpe, All-American. The part of Jim Thorpe, athlete, actor, and activist who stood up for Native American authenticity, was played by Burt Lancaster.
It's Burt Lancaster as Jim Thorpe, the nation's all-American pride.
See, in 1951, you couldn't call up the bank to complain about identity theft. The annals of popular film is studded with white faces tanning up to play Indian parts. Burt Lancaster couldn't stop playing Indians. Tony Curtis starred in The Outsider.
How many scalps you got in your pocket?
I'm a Pima Indian, sir. We don't do that, sir.
Natalie Wood in The Searchers. Burt Reynolds as Navajo Joe. Charles Bronson in Chato's Land. Elvis Presley in Flaming Star. Lee Van Cleef as Captain Apache. And this guy. But never is the Indian's character plumbed for any degree of shading or nuance or background. They're just superficial constructs, malleable metaphors, big chunks of Play-Doh to be molded into whatever's convenient to the story. If we want to show a tragic Indian, we make him a drunkard. And when we want to show the savage Indian, we just let John Wayne lead us to them.
They outnumber us 4-1. Do we talk or fight?
This is is The Invented Indian, written cinematically, based on adventure yarns and diluted stories of early contact, filtered through the sun-stroked delirium of some pudgy guy sitting at a holiday beach resort, pulped in the dime novels of Ned Buntline and other cardboard fantasists, and then reinvented in traveling Wild West shows. Shifted, distorted, polarized for entertainment purposes, and always at the margins. Why? Because they're Indians.
Beautiful ladies, what do you say? Bring them inside. There's that perfect. Krista's coming right behind right here today.
Are you guys all Navajo or what are you?
Yeah.
Yeah?
How are you?
I'm Navajo in Dakota.
Oh, Dakota?
Yeah, from up north.
Hey, way over there.
Yeah.
Do that Sundance?
Yeah.
Yeah, right on.
Yeah.
Pierce?
Yeah.
As we've already established, Indians did not, as a rule, hang underneath their horses or jump from one to another stagecoach style. The only time this does happen is if they're about to be trampled at the rodeo. You guys riders, you're riding tonight. What's the top prize?
Like almost $200.
$200?
No, $2,000.
Really?
2000 first?
Yeah.
Good luck, man.
Take care. Safe. Yeah.
But in a backhanded kind of way, Hollywood does give credit to the Indians when it comes to horsemanship. In 1680, the Pueblo Indians revolted against the Spanish and drove them off of their land and back to old Mexico. The Spanish were forced to leave their horses behind, so the Pueblo Indians began to breed the horses and then trade them to other tribes, particularly the Kiowa and the Comanche. The confluence of horse and buffalo represents one of the most profound changes in the Indians' history. Being mounted allowed Indians to hunt buffalo more adeptly, and it was buffalo that provided food, shelter in the form of teepee hides, winter protection in the form of hides and footwear. The Plains Indians would have become extinct if it wasn't for buffalo, and the horse allowed them to travel vast distances chasing the buffalo. It gave them a tremendous advantage over tribes who still traveled on foot. But the buffalo are a protected species. Indians don't roam the range on horseback anymore. Nowadays, their mode of transport is more likely to be a rusted-out Dodge.
Now, folks, this old cowboy's on the warpath with heap big savings. All our choices stock. Come on down off the res or the ranch and pick out your pony today.
Jonathan Wack's Pow Wow Highway, made in 1989, was considered a landmark film because it was one of the first films made by an Indian director with an all-Indian cast. And it dealt with contemporary Indian issues.
Fidel, I want to buy one of your fine ponies. Take a look around.
One of its most sustaining images is that staple of modern Indian life, the res car.
Whose car is this? This is Protector, the war pony.
Hang on.
This is how the white man learns.
Yeah.
Okay, do it.
White man got it started. White man got it started. Great job. There goes our war pony.
So this is a res car.
Sounds like it. It is. Oh, I love this car, man. Draws a lot of attention around here. It gets the girls, too, you know. It's taken me a long ways, you know. Different reservations, different women. Boy. That's the old president's house there, you know. The Navajo Nation.
It's a beautiful country.
God's country.
I am feeling the spirit right now.
Feeling every bump.
Mostly in my ass.
The road of life.
That's good. About half of the Native American population live on reservations, and these areas of land total 55.7 million acres. That's just over 2% of the land area of the United States. So you can see why American Indians are a little pissed off.
There's no stop signs here. These roads are all corroded, corrupted. We're a impoverished nation. Almost like a third world country, but we do all right, though.
Still, it's better than Sunderland. Like any impoverished area, Indian reservations are stricken with chronic unemployment, depression, ennui, health and nutrition problems, and domestic abuse. 5 of the top 10 causes of death among Native Americans are related to the abuse of alcohol, and on most reservations, it's illegal to buy or consume it.
We're running on fumes. We need to get some gas for this thing. White man, go do your work. Slave amongst us warriors here. So, what's this white guy doing down there? I think he's trying to reinvent the Indians, or?
Well, he's doing it on behalf of British people, I guess.
Those people?
Yeah.
Jeez.
Those people. You know that they drink the tea.
Oh, yeah. They like their tea.
Top of the morning to you kind of people, you know?
Oh, yeah. Uh-oh. Trouble.
Come on, War Pony.
Come on, baby.
Come on, War Pony.
Is there some chant that works here?
Throw your flashes on.
When a res car can no longer function as a res car, it usually becomes something else. Quite often, a doghouse. And after that, a storage shed. Thus, the res car is the most environmentally efficient vehicle on the planet. It preceded the Prius by several decades. But its initial breakdown often leaves the Indian on foot, which, given his historical perspective, isn't really all that unusual. Navajo are used to walking. There was a time they had to walk much, much further. But before we tell that story, it's probably a good idea to tell you a few things about the Navajo. They are, first and foremost, artisans. When the Pueblo Indians ran the Spanish off back to Mexico, the Spanish were forced to leave their horses and sheep behind. Well, the Navajo had no use for horses. There were no buffalo, but sheep. Now you're talking wool, blankets, rugs, all tradable items. Quite often the man they traded with was Kit Carson. Kit Carson was a trapper, scout, Indian agent, soldier, and authentic legend of the West. Few trappers became more integrated into the Indian world than Kit Carson. He traveled and lived extensively among them. His first 2 wives were Arapaho and Cheyenne women, and the Indians called him rope thrower. But Carson would become one of those, compromised heroes. In 1861, at the beginning of the Civil War, Kit Carson was conscripted by the Union Army. What happened after that is not generally viewed as heroic amongst Indians.
Kit Carson was recruited to come into Navajo country and subdue the Navajos once and for all on what he called the Scorched Earth Campaign.
The Navajo grew peaches right down in that canyon. They had 5,000 peach trees. Only the Navajo ate peaches, no other Indians. So Carson divided his troops into 2 regiments and entered from each end of the canyon. The idea was to round up the Navajo, but the Navajo hid up above and just threw rocks down at his troops, also curses. Carson did a lot of things to the Indians. Gave them blankets riddled with smallpox, and he made them walk 300 miles to live on an unarable piece of land outside Bosque Redondo Reservation. He let them starve along the way. But for Christ's sakes, how can you burn someone's peaches? Carson kept trying to resign, but the army wouldn't let him. His troops devastated the Navajo land and its people. Those that survived the onslaught eventually surrendered. In January 1864, 6,000 Navajo Indian were ordered to take the long walk.
That is a point in time that is pivotal or momentous to Navajo people. Our ancestors were herded like animals. Everybody had to walk because there were no wagons for anybody to ride. If you were a child, you were elderly, people who slowed the group down were shot on sight and left behind. People were not allowed to slow down, stop, and bury them. A lot of babies died because under stress, the mothers their bodies couldn't make milk.
By the time they had arrived 18 days later at Bosque Redondo, 200 of them had perished. Carson is buried in a cemetery outside Taos, New Mexico. Every night, Indians make a slightly unsteady procession to his gravesite to urinate on it. Yep, Indians are used to walking.
Riders on the storm. Riders on the storm.
Really, Rich? Indians are used to walking?
Well, I didn't say they enjoyed it, did I? I just said they're used to walking.
You know, it's something amazing that being a part of this documentary, I'm actually learning a lot about Indians I already didn't know. You did a good job on Google there, Rich.
All right, convey to me the essence of the nomadic Indian then.
Well, see, there you go, right there. It's a generalization. Not all Indians were nomadic. You can't make generalizations about Indians. It's dangerous water. You start with generalizations, you start making stories up. And that hurts us as a people.
All right.
Do you know where we are, Rich?
Goodwater Indian site. That's what the sign says.
It was a massacre, Rich.
Baby boy,
In 1866, the three great nations of the Inuit, Lakota, and the Seminole met at this very point to settle a blood feud that had lasted for 100 years, to make a blood pact. We were going to unite the nations on this great continent. General Tex Amico heard of it. And in the middle of the night, he circled the village. And without warning, released his 35-foot raptor upon the village, attacking the women and children.
Ate them.
Ate them? Raptors don't eat meat. He just kind of licked them with his tongue and used its mandibles to inflict damage. It was disgusting. The point is, Rich, not everything's a joke.
These aren't called mandibles. This is Pine Ridge, Shannon County, South Dakota. When the news shows want to show you the ground zero of Native American grievances, they always come to Pine Ridge. When they want to show you the center of Native American activities, they come to Pine Ridge, the home of the American Indian movement. 3 out of 10 people here have jobs. Anyone here have a job?
No. Me?
Okay, 1 out of 10 people here have jobs. Most of them are with the Bureau of Indian Affairs or Indian Health Services, who are funded by Washington, D.C., or they work for the Oglala tribe, which gets its money in subsidies and treaty payouts from Washington, D.C. For the record, the richest town in America is Leesburg, Loudoun County, Virginia. Most of the people there work for agencies and subcontractors of the federal government. They get their money from Washington, D.C. So answer me this. Why doesn't Pine Ridge look like Leesburg?
Because Pine Ridge is different and it has two different. I found one. Those green doors. Bury it.
It's as good as an answer as anything. Here on the Oglala Reservation, I've already learned a lot of useful tips that you can apply to your own life. If a dog runs after you, yell wahumpy. That means soup. The dog knows if he doesn't back off, he's going to become soup. Before moving your house onto a new set of blocks, cover the bricks in dishwashing liquid. Then the house will slide on slicker than deer guts on a doorknob. Ashes can remove blood from any wooden floor. Warm a drum hide head with a blow dryer before you play it, and it'll sound 10 times better. A knock on the door and no one's there, someone you love is going to die soon. Nebraska, the good life. It's only 40 yards from the Nebraska state line back to the Pine Ridge Reservation. But when you walk back to South Dakota, the temperature's the same, but the life expectancy drops by 12 years. The town of White Clay, Nebraska, population 12, is a vortex sucking the life out of the Sioux people. The 4 liquor stores here sell 4.5 million cans of beer a year. From sunup to closing time, the town is clustered with small, dark clouds of bleary-eyed, paralytic, zombified, drunken Indians, each one waiting for the next beer to appear like a minor miracle. Now, if you're British, you're probably looking at this thinking, hey, when did this show become a holiday travelogue? But before you book your ticket to White Clay, Nebraska, bear this statistic in mind. The biggest killer of people on the Pine Ridge Reservation isn't cancer, heart disease, or diabetes. It's car crashes. Pine Ridge doesn't have a problem with just drink driving. Pine Ridge has a problem with drink walking. So do you find like the town of White Clay over here to be a nemesis to keeping safety and sanity on the reservation?
It's creating a lot of pain and hardships here.
Last year, for the last probably 6-7 years or so, we've been on the highest as far as car crashes in the nation for fatalities.
Majority were a result of alcohol.
Do those signs indicate a fatality?
Correct. Even if you see a cross, because a lot of them don't have the why die, X marks the spot sign. So a lot of them will actually have a cross, or you'll see some flowers or candles in the road ditch. That simulates the same thing, that there was a fatality there.
In the last year, a concentrated police and community campaign to enforce seatbelt safety and child restraint devices has lowered the Oglala fatality rate considerably.
Last year we had 47 fatality car crashes. This year we have 6, so we're not at the top anymore.
Oh, yeah.
Call him drunken Ira Hayes, he won't answer anymore.
The existence of a place like White Clay, Nebraska underscores the widely held belief that Indians are tragically susceptible to alcohol. There's never been a shred of scientific evidence to prove this.
There's a story I would tell.
The Hollywood image of the Indian as a hapless victim of alcohol, without ever showing the underlying conditions such as poverty, depression, and unemployment, only proves one thing, that Indians are susceptible to stereotyping. Perhaps the main reason the American Indian has been so historically taken out of context is because historically they've never had a lot of text to begin with. Traditionally, the history of the Indian has been passed down orally from generation to generation.
In traditional form, storytellers were taught from the very beginning of their instruction that you need to remember every word by its word. You know, you can't change the facts, because there are these critical moments in our history that we all as people recognize this impacted our people to such a great degree that we need to remember this. You don't change the oral history, because that's how we learn, that's how we remember.
Astoundingly, it wasn't until well into the 20th century that anyone came up with the scholarly idea of documenting the Indians' history by actually going to the source. And that source was named Black Elk. In 1930, an American poet and writer from Nebraska named John Neihardt spent 18 months interviewing the Oglala Sioux spiritual leader. Neihardt published the book and called it Black Elk Speaks. Instead of a short interview, Black Elk gave Neihardt a complete narrative of his own life and that of his people, the Oglala Lakota. It was a story of burned-out teepees, slaughtered buffalo, slain relatives. It also includes Black Elk's personal description of the events of Wounded Knee. While Neihardt was living with and documenting Black Elk's life, a 2-year drought had taken over South Dakota, so Black Elk took Neihardt to the top of Harney Peak, the highest mountain in South Dakota, and in a feeble, faltering voice, he uttered a Lakotan prayer. Then suddenly, the skies opened up. This prayer appears word for word in Neihardt's book, and this life-giving essence appears to be both the perfect ending to a book and to an old man's life. The only thing was, Neihardt hadn't brought his interpreter along, so he couldn't possibly have known what Black Elk really said. Also, Black Elk wasn't as feeble as he was letting on. He lived another 17 years. Roughly 40 years later, Black Elk Speaks would become a bestseller, the official hippie Bible, not for its historical content, but for its environmental aesthetic.
And the seasons, they go round and round, and the painted ponies go up and down. We're captive on the carousel of time.
It was an aesthetic that hippies, folk singers, and mystical magpies could easily distill, slather in patchouli oil, and put a few chords underneath.
And go round and round and round in the circle, yeah.
Religion is not a concept that Indians use because Indians don't use the word religion. If they do, it's for our appeasement. They don't run up to each other and say, "Hey, what religion are you?" Because religion implies that things are always going to end badly. Holy wars, crucifixion, annihilation. Indians believe in spirits and spirituality. Spirituality consists of two things, nature and creation. This circular logic is broken down into quadripartite divisions. Sun, moon, sky, stars, red, green, blue, yellow, 4 seasons, 4 winds, 4 directions. These are things that Dallas Goldtooth has told me. That's right, that big galoot, that guy who looks like a waterlogged version of David Williams, has actually taught me a few things.
You know, there's no manual there to explain what spirituality means for Native people, because there's hundreds and hundreds of different viewpoints on the world. And to try to accumulate that all into one definition is really hard. Me, I'm a Dakota man. And our word for the creator, the essence, the energy that created all things, we could say Wakantanka. That simply means the great sacred, the great mystery, this unknown power that is out there. Nothing beyond that. There's no research being done in Dakota colleges trying to figure out what is, this unknown being. What is it? It just is. It's this unknown power that has created everything around us.
It's all one, who we are, our essence. Don't have any separation of the culture, the religion. And you have the sun, the wind, Mother Earth. We pray, use different plants and different herbs to pray with, and the wind takes our prayers. So these are some of our beliefs. We don't have cathedrals. Our cathedrals are the Great Southwest, or the Black Hills for the Lakota, the trees, and the waters.
Black Elk lived in a lot of different places in the Dakota Territory, including this cabin. At the age of 16, he was designated a healer and a medicine man. 5 years later, he would embark on a totally new experience. In November of 1886, Black Elk, the medicine man, joined 133 other Lakota and boarded a train from Rushville, Nebraska to Showbiz Land. Black Elk became a member of Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. Each Lakota was paid $25 a week once they'd agreed to be baptized. It's probably safe to say that none of the Indians who appeared in the Wild West show, which at times included Sitting Bull, Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce, and Geronimo, were actually driven by an acting bug. Sitting Bull was forced to perform in the Wild West show because he was a prisoner of the United States. It was a chance to get off the reservation. The modern-day equivalent would be of a Guantanamo detainee suddenly had to appear on X Factor. The Wild West show performed at Madison Square Garden in New York City for 4 months to monster reviews. And on March 31st, 1887, the entire Lakota entourage set sail for England. On the transatlantic voyage, Black Elk was by turns fearful and amazed. He actually thought that the boat was going to sail off the edge of the world, because, he was 21. He wasn't presumably thinking circuitously yet. When the boat hit a heavy storm and the crew had to pass out life jackets, the Lakota started chanting their own death song. What's a death song?
Huh? I don't know, everyone has their own.
Do you have one?
Yeah.
Creator! I don't want to die! I don't want to die!
On May 11th, 1887, Black Elk was one of 5 Lakota included in Buffalo Bill's command performance for Queen Victoria. The train left London for Birmingham and then Salford, but Black Elk didn't make it, because he and 3 friends got lost wandering around London and were actually arrested by police as suspects in a murder that was eventually attributed to Jack the Ripper. So then Black Elk joined the Mexican Joe Shelley show, which was a knockoff of the Buffalo Bill show, but paid twice as much. Then he headed for Europe, all the while forming a clearer understanding of white Christianity and its practice. One day, at a breakfast table in France, he suddenly fell off his chair unconscious. A doctor showed up and pronounced him dead. A casket was ordered. But Black Elk was actually having a dream vision. And in that dream, he was back home, circling high above his mother's perfectly round teepee. He saw all his relatives mourning his death. And then he woke up, announced he was fine, and a week later, boarded a ship back to America. Black Elk couldn't quite understand the significance of the dream. 3 years later, in the aftermath of Wounded Knee, it would all make sense. It wasn't Black Elk's death the Lakota people were mourning. It was their own. Tensions had reached a plateau between the Lakota and the U.S. government. More of their land was being signed away, and the tribes were being systematically rounded up and moved to camps. It was a time of suffering and degradation, and the Lakota were looking for something, anything to believe in. The attempts to baptize and indoctrinate them into Christianity had crystallized into a mutant strain of evangelism called the Ghost Dance Movement.
Now they resorted to a new faith, and a dance was part of that faith. If they danced with fervor, if they renounced war and loved all people, the buffalo would return, the white man would be swept away, and the dead rise. It became known as the religion of the ghost dance.
Convinced the ghost dance was a prelude to all-out war, the Army decided to move in and shut the ritual down. Instead of discouraging the practice, the band actually expanded it. Fearful of a total uprising, federal troops were brought into Pine Ridge to round up the ghost dancers. 500 Lakota were arrested. The cavalry, in fact the entire Northern Plains Army, was already in a fairly vindictive state. Only 2 weeks earlier over in the Standing Rock Reservation they had killed Sitting Bull, the former star attraction of Buffalo Bill's Wild West traveling show. Now many other Lakota were fearful of further reprisals. On December 23rd, 1890, a group of 300 Hunkpapa and Minneconjou Lakota, led by the Minneconjou leader, Bigfoot, left the Cheyenne River Reservation to join up with Chief Red Cloud's Pine Ridge Reservation Indians. They mistakenly thought they'd be safer. This only made the cavalry more nervous, and orders were quickly made to disarm the Sioux. They were intercepted by the 7th Cavalry on December 28th at the site of Wounded Knee Creek, a few miles from Pine Ridge. Leonard Littlefinger is a teacher from the town of Oglala, South Dakota. His grandfather survived the massacre.
Chief Bigfoot and his family were going to be loaded up onto boxcars and taken to Florida. The rationale of the military at that time was if they took the leaders out, then the people would quietly enter the reservations and be there for the rest of the time, so to speak. In the morning, all were gathered together, and my grandfather was with the group, and although he was 14 years old at the time, he still would be considered as a warrior. He was told by an interpreter that they wanted to demonstrate what they would do in the event that some of them broke away from the group and tried to escape. All of the soldiers that were lined up opposite, and he kept his eye on the one that was immediately facing him. He noticed that as they pulled the bolt of the rifle backward, the shell went into the chamber, and he locked it. And at that instant, he knew that they were going to shoot him. And so he took a running jump at that soldier, and he said, I hit him as hard as I could, and I knocked him down. And point blank, the shooting started. They were literally slaughtering all these people, mostly women and children.
Leonard Littlefinger's grandfather was shot twice, but managed to escape. Many didn't live to pass their stories down. 150 Lakota men, women, and children were dead, amongst them spotted elk. Army casualties numbered 25. Eyewitnesses said that the Army officers lost control of their men as they randomly shot women and children who were running for cover.
He said, my thought was, these are cowards. They're not soldiers, they're cowards.
The massacre at Wounded Knee, many of whose victims are buried in this mass grave, marks the end of 50 years of hostility between the cavalry and the Plains Indians. And the Plains Indians were and still are vastly relegated to reservations. In 1890, the The unofficial American policy of containment and manifest destiny of Indians turned to subsidizing them. Subsidized housing, subsidized rations, subsidized education. From here on in, it was cheaper to feed an Indian than to fight him.
Bury my heart in Wounded Knee.
In February 1973, Wounded Knee would regain historical prominence when 200 Oglala Sioux, followers of the American Indian movement, seized the area and took up arms against government policy. The Wounded Knee massacre site was cordoned off by tribal police and then the FBI, and the standoff between activists and government officers lasted 71 days. The term Wounded Knee, what does it mean to people, to Indians in particular?
This place represents in its full embodiment, the struggle of Native people, at two different time frames. Both cases, Native people were the terrorist threat to America at this location. We were the terrorists that needed to be rubbed out, that we threatened the very ideals of America at this location. And in one instance, there was death. In the other instance, there was a sort of triumph, that feeling that we finally took control of something.
The phrase, bury my heart at Wounded Knee, comes from a Stephen Vincent Benet poem about American place names. In 1970, the author and historian D. Brown used it as the title for his book. It became a phenomenal bestseller and the definitive text on Native American history. Americans went from knowing nothing about Indians to thinking they knew everything about Indians. You could read it and swallow a giant guilt pill. With this newfound acknowledgement of the Indians' existence, it was only a matter of time until it would morph into wholesale commercialism. Because America's way of apologizing to people they've screwed over is to stick them on a t-shirt or a package. Madison Avenue learned a long time ago that there was money to be made in exploiting Native American spirituality. After all, Indians were the first Green Party, weren't they? Thus, if Indians were to make, cigarettes, well, they would have to be more spiritual than regular cigarettes, wouldn't they? Because smoke was sacred to Indians. It always has been. It's used as a medium to send prayers to the Creator. So the makers of natural American spirit cigarettes want you to believe that not only are you filling your lungs with chemicals and nicotine, you're actually sending great big billows of prayer to the sky. The only thing is, these cigarettes aren't remotely Indian. They're just another R.J. Reynolds British American tobacco product. They're cigarettes with a fucking Indian on the front. The Indian became a shibboleth, a brand, a flavor, a mascot, a fashion. Everyone under 30 suddenly discovered they had a little Cherokee or Cheyenne in them, usually on their great-grandmother's side, because suddenly Indians were cool.
It pisses me off, man. It gets down to the very core of a lot of Indian people's anger, this idea that our culture, our stories, our history is up for sale. And I think that's where the societies butt heads all the time.
It's just making mockery of who we are as a people. When you're making fun of a people through characters and like professional sports. You have football teams that call themselves the Washington Redskins, Kansas City Chiefs, and bucktooth characters of Indian, like Cleveland Indian. That's degrading, humiliating to be doing that to a people, and you don't see them doing that, making fun of African Americans, or doing that to Hispanics.
Every summer in South Dakota, I think there's like 80-some Sundances. It's also the same time that thousands of Europeans flock to western South Dakota.
In the past, the sun dancers fasted and danced continuously for several days and nights. The sun dance was one of the most important tribal ceremonies of the Plains Indians.
They come in droves to experience this. And they come just all prepared, and they have freaking buffalo robes, and they smell like freaking sandalwood, and they don't shower. It's all a means of them trying to access, in their mind, some connection, some better connection to, the Druids. I don't know what culture they have, But they're freaking cultural raccoons, cultural vampires.
We got people coming in from, I don't want to offend you guys, but from Europe coming here singing our songs.
Really?
And sometimes even knowing those songs better than our own people. Why? Because they want to feel whole. They want to be part, I guess, of this universe, of this, of Mother Earth.
A lot of them pay for being to Sundance. But if they do that, that doesn't mean anything. There's no spirituality there. They're just dancing for nothing.
Today, the Sundance is fully understood only by the older members of the tribe.
Like the Seminole Navajo.
Hi, wannabes. Are you tired of being left out in the cold with no native heritage? Unaware of your Indian roots, or perhaps you have no Indian roots? Feel uncomfortable at powwows? Well, soon you'll be out there singing and dancing with the rest of us, thanks to Generic-y.
I'm an Indian too, a Sioux.
This is a dream catcher. You know who has one of these tattooed onto her rib cage? Miley Cyrus. That's right. That Disney-fied has taken an Indian symbol and put it onto her body. Makes a perfect target for when you want to punch her. But tourists love to snap these things up, thinking that by buying some made-in-China spider web, they'll be connected to the spiritual world. Well, they're not. The dream catcher was originally used by Ojibwe Indians. They hung it above their children's bed to keep away nightmares. That's it. It's a charm. So when some crystal-waving New Age poodle hangs one of these from their rearview mirror, all it really indicates is that they tend to fall asleep at the wheel a lot. That's very interesting, you're thinking, Rich. But did you really just call Miley Cyrus a Disney-fied? Yes, I did. What are you going to do about it, Miley? Oh, we're going to tell your dad, that one-hit wonder mulleted hillbilly? Come on down here, Billy Ray. Come on. I'll give you an achy-breaky jaw.
Generic-y. Now, you may not be able to prove it, but you'll know it in your heart. Caution, side effects may include suicide, poverty, disease, and general loss of land.
It's one thing to be almost comically unaware of why you're appropriating someone's culture, but to take the heart and soul of a people's spiritualism and to turn it into a white man's artifact is another thing entirely. In 1970, a drunken, irascible Irishman named Richard Harris reduced the Lakota Sundance ritual to ham-fisted autoerotica by appearing in A Man Called Horse. Probably no film has pissed Indians off more. Harris plays a British fop named John Morgan, who's bird hunting in the Dakota Territory when he's kidnapped viciously by Sioux.
Richard Harris is a man called Horse.
For most of the movie, Morgan is tortured and humiliated by the Sioux. Spends a lot of time showing off his torso and delicately obscuring his junk with the help of various dingles, dongles, and editing tricks. The film was promoted as the most authentic description of North American Indian life ever filmed. If your idea of authentic is a Brit screaming obscenities like he's just been served an undercooked roast at a shit restaurant.
Christ! I've had enough! You bunch of bloody bastards! I'm not a horse! I'm not an animal!
A Man Called Horse's most memorable scene is when he's strung up and suspended by his chest to prove his macho courage. Thus, the filmmakers turned the Sundance ceremony, the most sacred of Indian religious rites, undertaken to prove a man's humility to the spirits by mortifying his flesh, and turn it into torture porn. Now, having been accepted by the Lakota, in no time he proves that he's pretty much better than them at everything they do. In the end, the film manages to perpetuate the idea of Euro-Caucasian superiority. The movie scenes are exquisitely confounding to most Indians, particularly this one, where Morgan appears to be shooting Ozzy Osbourne. So, while Richard Harris was being hung by his man-boobs, apparently for no other reason than to prove his man-boobliness, in the real world, something far more significant was taking place. Namely, the Native American takeover of Alcatraz Island in California. Suddenly, the Indian issue was at the forefront. What was the Indian issue? Well, it depends on which viewpoint you take. The white, benign viewpoint was that current Indian rights needed to be clarified. But the Native American viewpoint was not only that existing rights needed to be defended, but that past rights needed to be reclaimed. On November 20th, 1969, at the height of anti-war activism and dissidence in the U.S., a group of American Indians occupied Alcatraz Island outside San Francisco to stake a claim to land that was previously theirs.
We were trying to hang on to our culture, to our religion, to be Indians.
The occupation of Alcatraz preceded the standoff at Wounded Knee by over 3 years. Alcatraz was the beginning of the American Indian Movement, or AIM. AIM is both an ideal and an organization whose existence to this very day is still a contentious issue to the U.S. government.
I hitchhiked out there when I was a student. It took me 2 days, but I wanted to see what that was all about, and that was my start in the Indian rights movement. We were looking for events that would allow us to participate and give voice. We have to do our part to educate white society that we have these feelings. We're upset with the way the conditions and the treatment of our people.
The occupation lasted until 1971. It was forcibly ended by the U.S. government, but it was seen as a victory by those taking part because it brought Indian issues to national attention. Belatedly, of course, Hollywood woke up and took notice. The cinematic Indian and the real Indian had reached a confluence. Soldier Blue uses the Indian as a proxy for the massacre at My Lai in Vietnam. It shows a graphic annihilation of the Cheyenne at Sand Creek, Colorado in 1864. In fact, the brutal scene is what most people remember about the film, and because it's used metaphorically, it manages once again to distort the Native Americans' existence.
Oh, why? Why? Shut up! Why? Why? Shut up! Why?
Rubbing people's faces in bloodshed wasn't really going to do that much for a nation that was used to watching the real thing on television every night. The modern Indian's real appeal was discovered by youth, rebellious youth, disaffected youth. Pay attention to kids. They're not looking for victims. They're looking for heroes. And in 1971, they found one.
When Jean and the kids at the school tell me that I'm supposed to control my violent temper and be passive and nonviolent like they are, I try. I really try. But when I see this girl of such a beautiful spirit, so degraded, I just go berserk.
Billy Jack is one of the most phenomenally successful action heroes to ever appear on film. Tom Laughlin's one-man show of directing, producing, and acting was a true example of American independent filmmaking, and it preceded Rocky by 5 years.
They'll kill you, Billy. I wish there was something I could say to change all that.
An Indian isn't afraid to die. Don't ever expect a white man to understand that.
I understand it.
Billy Jack is a half-breed Indian and a former war hero. He uses Hapkido to settle redneck transgressions on the res. It's an anti-war movie where everybody who isn't anti-war gets their butts kicked.
You know what I think I'm going to do then? Just for the hell of it. Tell me. I'm going to take this right foot and I'm going to whop you on that side of your face. And you want to know something? There's not a damn thing you're going to be able to do about it. Really? Really?
The movie can be embraced as a political statement or as just a good old-fashioned fist fest. But either way, its timing couldn't have been more appropriate.
Yeah, Billy Jack, man, he was the man. I mean, he was my idol back in the days when I was growing up. And at that time, I looked at it, he was standing up for the rights of our people.
Well, see, much of the appeal of Billy Jack was that he bridged the polar gaps of political sentiment at the time because he was violently anti-violent. He was a hippie, and he was a war hero, and he was a half-breed, which is always a safe route for Hollywood to take, because the half-breed hero is always going to be a fierce fighter and a convenient victim.
Why is Billy Jack one of the most popular pictures of our time? People all over America have paid more than $30 million to see it.
Billy Jack was a half-breed. I don't know what the other half was because they never said what tribe he was from. So he was this generic Indian. And also he was a half-breed, so it gave him license to be a little bit smarter than the regular Indians. You see that with Val Kilmer in that god-awful movie Thunderheart, where the FBI is the fucking hero and the Indian reservations. Oh, Jesus.
And also what I saw was that it all had a taint of culture of the tribe where he was at, too, so which was pretty cool.
When we see the amalgamated Indian on screen, more times than not, we're seeing the Sioux. Well, the Sioux bring a lot of sizzle to the show. Headdresses, drums, teepees, buffalo. The Sioux are the Elvises of the Indian world. In 1990, Kevin Costner came a lot closer to getting it right, if getting it right means showing a more dimensional representation of Indians. Dances with Wolves shows the Lakotas warm, affectionate, humorous, friendly people with a true sense of justice. Real characters. So much so that Costner's Lieutenant Dunbar wants to be an Indian, in much the same way as any 6-year-old kid wants to be an Indian.
There ain't nothing here, Lieutenant. Everybody's run off or got killed.
What about Indians?
Costner cast Native Americans in most of the parts. Graham Greene won an Academy Award nomination for his portrayal of Kicking Bird. Floyd Red Crow Westerman plays Tin Bears. Rodney Grant is Wind in His Hair. Samuel L. Jackson is Snakes on a Plane. I'm kidding, he wasn't in it at all. This tends to make the Sioux characters seem authentic, because they are. And each Sioux character has a correlative white opposite who is clearly...
Says here that you've been decorated, and they sent you here to be posted.
Actually, sir, I'm here at my own request.
Why?
I've always wanted to see the frontier.
Do you want to see the frontier?
Yes, sir. Before it's gone.
Dunbar's commanding officer is some kind of Anglo-centric nutcase who talks down to Dunbar like a king dismissing his subjects. What Costner, the director, is trying to show you is that these early descendants of British settlers can't possibly really fit in America, especially here on the frontier, where they're way out of their element. Because, you know, there's no East Enders here. No snuggy, comfy front rooms and sofas and bickies and tea. You know, a bunch of puffs.
Thank you, that is all. Sir Knight? I just pissed in my pants, and nobody can do anything about it.
Essentially, this kind of lunacy primes the viewer to accept that it's the Lakota who really have it together.
You there!
And the scene where Dunbar first encounters the Indians is almost an exact remake of A Man Called Horse, a civilized Indian stumbling onto a naked white savage. Nice comic conversion there, Kevin.
Buffalo.
Although what we're really seeing is a kind of baptism, Dunbar is shedding his Euro-American veneer And as the film progresses, we see his almost childlike rebirth, his transformation into Indianness, if such a word could exist. Just like a man called Horse, he marries a squaw, even if she does happen to be conveniently white. When he leads the Lakota to an elusive herd of buffalo, he becomes a full-fledged member of the tribe. And because this is still a story about a white man, he proves to be as adept, if not better at being a Lakota, than the Lakota. Costner changed the ending of the story in order to make himself more of a martyr. When Dunbar is captured by the cavalry and charged with treason, he knows that he can't go back to live with the Dakota because the cavalry will attack them for harboring him. So he just disappears into the wilderness, never to be found again. The film received particular praise for its use of authentic Lakota language. You gotta give Costner credit for that. Its extremely moving last scene, as Wind in his hair waves goodbye to Lieutenant Dunbar, is pretty courageous for a Hollywood film, because few viewers would actually know what Wind in his hair is saying. Although if I had to guess, he's trying to talk Costner out of making Waterworld. Dances with Wolves was a box office smash. Won the Academy Award for Best Picture of 1990. It's credited with reinventing the Western and setting the record straight and spawning a more enlightened approach toward Indians in filmmaking. But it is set in that very safe, cinematic Wild West period of 1840 to 1890, period that very few filmmakers ever let the Indians out of. It's a romantic vision of Indians living in an environmental paradise ruined by the white man. The epilogue of the film says that 13 years later, the Lakota will be defeated completely, never to roam again.
Still here.
Every effort to foreground themselves, 40 years of activism, every attempt to claim the present and reclaim the past, make a better life for themselves, as far as Kevin Costner is concerned, disappears into a romantic postcard sunset. So Kevin Costner's Dunbar turns out to be a better Lakota than the Lakotas. And Costner, the director, is better at being a white director of an Indian film than other white directors. Whoop-de-fucking-do. Why in all these quasi-enlightened cod apologist films does the white man end up being superior? Well, do we even have to ask? Because they're made in Hollywood, by white producers, and written by white screenwriters, for white audiences who are sitting in their plush cinema seats thinking they're being enlightened while blissfully unaware that even the popcorn they're stuffing down their yaks is an Indian invention. If a studio is going to pony up the money for a big production, they're damn well going to reward the viewer by making him seem superior. So if that's the case, how come no one has ever made a film about a white guy who moves on to a reservation and ends up being better at living on the reservation than the Indians? You know, he gets all the shitty cars running again, and he fills in the potholes, and he rounds up all the stray dogs and gives them a flea dip. Then he cures diabetes and builds a Walmart. Where's that film? Is it even possible for a white person to talk about Indians without coming off as patronizing, paternalistic, and generally just looking like an asshole, such as I have been doing in this presentation?
No.
Thank you. I've wasted 80 minutes of your time. Well, I'm done talking.
The last 20 years has seen the emergence of indigenous Native American cinema. Films made by us for anyone who wants to see them. So while you're all sitting around watching another white man play Tonto, Indians are inventing Indians. You know, as an indigenous person, this has been such a beautiful journey for me. Learning about my history, my culture from a graveled-voiced white man from Montana who looks like the lizard from Rango. But ultimately, when it ends, what I want to say is that what we're dealing with is a colonial legacy here. A legacy in which the mainstream society of America has predetermined what matters and what doesn't matter when discussing history. You can ask me if a non-native person can make a film about native people. Ultimately, I'll say yes. Whether that film merits indigenous authenticity, it's not really the main issue for me here. It's the colonial legacy that's the main issue for me. Indigenous peoples, along with countless other ethnic minorities, have been excluded for far too long from this whole creative process of making stories that are supposed to be about them. A pivotal moment in my life as a Native person, as a Native artist, was the movie Smoke Signals. It empowered us as artists to tell our own stories in our own words. Because of that movie, we're able to make Skins, Imprint, The Fast Runner, The Whale Rider. Yes, it's a Maori film, but it's a Native eye, and it's about Native people. You have amazing directors like Sterling Harjo. You have Chris Eyre, Georgina Lightning. You have Black Horse Lowe.
My name is Leonard Littlefinger. I am an Oglala Lakota.
My name is Alima Benali. I am Navajo.
My name is Charlie Hill. I'm an Oneida from Wisconsin.
To answer the big question, why don't Indian people get with the program? It's because the program is that we're supposed to be dead, and we're not. We're still here, living our lives.
The government had a genocidal program against us. And then people always say, well, that was a long time ago. Well, hey, 9/11 was 10 years ago. Get over it. That was a long time ago.
We are all here today because they came home. Whatever it took, whatever strength or power they had, they did it for us who are here today.
My name is Lenny Foster. I'm a Dene Navajo. Society is always changing, and eventually society will understand and become more sensitive and aware. Then they'll drop that name, Redskin, or Chiefs or Braves.
My Indian name is Anukasahopa, and what's going to happen in the future. We're still going to be here. We're still going to be here.
I think that's it. I'm off.
It's been good working with you, Dallas.
Yeah.
Appreciate everything, man. Nah, don't hug me. Rustle the mic. Back to Minneapolis?
Yeah, well, Minnesota.
How you getting there?
I'm walking, of course. Isn't that what our people like to do? Walk? I might shapeshift on you, watch out. Got those powers, woo!
It was Joe Frazier.
Honky. Huh?
The knock at the door. Joe Frazier, Smoking Joe. I love that guy.
I love that guy too, Rich. Huh. See you around.
Children of nature. Unflinching stoics, human curiosities, bloodthirsty savages, noble warriors, victims of manifest destiny. The American Indian has been routinely regarded as anything but what he actually is, which is a true-to-life, actual human being. You could almost argue that those early so-called bad Indians from TV and films were less insulting to the intelligence because the prejudice was right there on the surface. The so-called new wave of revisionist or accurate films that began with Soldier Blue in 1970 are a little more confusing because we're meant to believe this is the real story. Consequently, our interpretation of the Indian is always confounding. Part shame, part guilt, part admiration, a whole lot of obsequiousness, pandering, and a shitload of patronization. And that's if we think about him at all. But this one thing is true. Wherever you stand in this country, an Indian stood here first.
Come on, boy, take me back. I wanna ride in Geronimo's Cadillac.
Getting the old grey matter going here on BBC4 this week. We've the second quarter-final in the brand new series of Only Connect coming up tomorrow at 8:30. Next tonight, though, Time Shift meets the British Army of the Rhine. Stay with us.